In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, September 19th. It's a race against time for President Yoon as he seeks to schedule as many separate summits with his global counterparts on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly to address bilateral interests and Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. And a controversial prisoner swap between Washington and Tehran takes place following the transfer of $6 billion worth of Iranian funds frozen here in South Korea since 2019 to bank accounts in Qatar. Meanwhile, the Washington, D.C. Federal District Court dismisses a lawsuit filed last October by U.S. nuclear energy company Westinghouse against its competitor Korea Hydro in nuclear power to block the latter's sale of reactors to Poland. We start in New York, where President Yoon is engaged in a flurry of diplomatic interactions ahead of his speech scheduled for Wednesday U.S. time at the UN General Debate. Our presidential correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers day one of his agenda.
President Yoon is utilizing the UN General Assembly visit to New York to meet with as many leaders on the sidelines as possible to request support for Busan's bid to host the World Expo 2030. At 10 a.m. on Monday, he landed at John F. Kennedy Airport and went straight to meet his Sri Lankan counterpart for talks, which was followed by summits with San Marino, Burundi, the Czech Republic, Denmark, and Montenegro, among others. By just 7 p.m., he had met with 8 leaders. The meetings will have a repeated message requesting support at the BIE. But understanding the broader bilateral context is vital for Yoon during these meetings in order to use the opportunity to broaden South Korea's multilateral diplomacy. For instance, the meeting with San Marino marked the first talks between its leadership and a South Korean president. They discussed enhancing tourism cooperation. Similarly, in the meeting with the Czech Republic, they focused on energy and infrastructure, particularly hydrogen energy and trains, areas where the Czech Republic is seeking collaboration with South Korea. Yoon also discussed climate change with countries including Denmark, a long-standing ally since the establishment of the Green Growth Alliance in 2011. Additionally, several countries acknowledged South Korea's significant role in ensuring stability in the Asia-Pacific region through security cooperation. If all goes to plan for his stay until Friday, he's set to meet with around 40 leaders. That's not to say sideline summits are the only items on the president's schedule. He'll also meet with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and will attend a reception hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden. Wednesday is a big day, as Yoon will be delivering his speech at the UN General Assembly. He also returns to NYU's Digital Vision Forum on Thursday, before wrapping things up here on Friday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, New York.
Now, amid this latest presidential agenda in the global arena, a former South Korean ambassador to the UN says the Yoon administration's intentions to expand its role in addressing global concerns is a welcome initiative. My colleague Oh Soo-young covers his remarks.
South Korea has a crucial role to play in a world that faces continuous threats and challenges that leave the most vulnerable people in society even further behind. That's according to South Korea's former ambassador to the United Nations, Oh Jun, who also served as president of the UN Economic and Social Council. Ahead of President Yoon's address to the General Assembly, all raised the urgency of advancing key 2030 agendas, including the Sustainable Development Goals to end extreme poverty and the Paris Climate Agreement on reducing carbon emissions. He says time is running out.
The implementation of the SDGs has been negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as you know. For example, the global population below the poverty line, which had been going down since the Millennium Development Goals, started to grow again for the first time in 20 years.
Or underscored the humanitarian crisis in Myanmar as an example, having visited the Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh last month, which is the world's largest with about 1 million refugees, half of whom are children under 18.
The number of refugees and displaced people in the world keeps growing, with more diverse factors causing their hardship, such as wars, climate crises, and natural disasters.
Or endorses Ho's growing commitment to official development assistance, which will see a 44% increase in next year's budget. He said the beneficiary-turned-donor country can now increase the quality as well as the quantity of its contributions. This includes President Yoon's push to set global standards on digital access, rights, usage and development.
Standardization will also help to enable many developing countries in the world to gain access to the global market and to position themselves on an equal footing with the developed economies. This, I hope, will in turn contribute to bridging the digital divide globally, which is an important target of the United Nations and other international bodies.
Or chairs Save the Children Korea, which has provided tablet PCs and online education to increase access to quality learning, as well as aid for children in conflict-ridden Myanmar and Ukraine. Despite the growing number of common challenges, Or says global cooperation has also suffered setbacks due to reasons that include rising nationalism.
Countries like South Korea should be more active in promoting global cooperation, because as a middle power, we benefit more from a stable and rule-based world based on global governance provided by multilateral institutions. For example, when the war in Ukraine is over, I think there will be a serious debate on the big loopholes we have in the current peacekeeping mechanism. I hope South Korea can play a leading role in such a debate, not least because we will be a member of the Security Council for the next 2 years.
President Yoon on Wednesday will push for Ukraine's peace and reconstruction and outline his plan to address global gaps in development, climate and digital transformation in its vision to make Seoul a more responsible actor in the international community. 오수영, Arirang News, New York.
Also, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken sat down with Chinese Vice President Han Zheng to touch upon North Korea's weapons, Russia's war and the Taiwan Strait. In his opening remarks, Blinken said the world expects the U.S. and China to manage their relationship responsibly, and Washington remains committed to doing so. Han, for his part, noted that the world needs a steady and sound relationship between the two countries and urged Washington to take more, quote, concrete action. In a statement after the meeting, the U.S. State Department claimed the two officials had, quote, a candid and constructive discussion and agreed to keep the communication lines open. In other news, a diplomatic deal reportedly months in the making has seen the transfer of frozen Iranian funds here in Korea to bank accounts in Qatar in a controversial prisoner swap between the U.S. and Iran. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
The United States and Iran have completed a rare prisoner swap deal after billions of U.S. dollars of Iranian funds frozen in South Korea were released back to Tehran. In a statement on Monday, U.S. President Joe Biden said 5 Americans who were imprisoned in Iran are finally coming home. These Americans had been detained in Iran for nearly a decade on a number of allegations, including espionage. Separately, Iran's state-run media reported that 5 Iranians held by the U.S. who had been charged with crimes are now free. 2 of the 5 have reportedly landed in Tehran. Citing sources, Reuters said the swap happened after both sides confirmed that around $6 billion of frozen Iranian assets were transferred from South Korea to Qatar, the mediator of the U.S.-Iran talks. Seoul's foreign ministry on Tuesday confirmed that the Iranian funds have been successfully transferred to Qatar. The money had been locked in South Korea due to sanctions imposed by the U.S. following its withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. The frozen funds have become one of the main reasons behind South Korea and Iran's thorny relations, as Tehran has long been demanding that Seoul release the funds. That being said, the ministry also expressed hope to see developments in relations with Iran following the transfer. Meanwhile, Biden thanked South Korea and other countries involved for helping the detained Americans come home. The U.S. president said that he was grateful to the partner countries for their tireless efforts to achieve the goals and thanked the governments of South Korea, Qatar, Oman, and Switzerland. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also thanked South Korea for its close coordination and partnership. Although the prisoner swap and release of Iranian funds may appear to be an encouraging development in Washington and Tehran's rocky relationship, tensions are expected to remain high, with Tehran's nuclear program still a sticking point. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power is breathing a sigh of relief as a U.S. district court has dismissed a lawsuit against its exports of reactors. Our Yoon explains.
On Monday, the U.S. Federal District Court of Washington, D.C. dismissed Westinghouse's case filed against Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power over issues of intellectual property infringement. Westinghouse had filed complaints in a U.S. court in October last year against KHNP and its parent Korea Electric Power Corporation to block South Korea's exports of nuclear power reactors to Poland. The move came shortly after KHNP had inked a letter of intent with energy companies in Poland to build a nuclear power plant, which includes multiple 1.4 gigawatt capacity power units. Westinghouse argued that the Korean APR 1400 nuclear reactor model was based on its original design and technology, which requires agreement before any exports. Meanwhile, KHNP argued that while assistance was received in the early stages of development of the APR 1400, the core technology was domestically developed, making it free from U.S. export restrictions or any royalty payments. However, the Washington, D.C. Federal District Court dismissed the case over lack of standing to sue based on the Department of Energy's Rules and Regulations Part 810. The court stated that the authority to enforce the export restriction had been delegated exclusively to the U.S. Attorney General, and therefore a private entity that is not the U.S. government does not hold the legal authority to assert the rights. The core issue of intellectual property infringement has not been addressed, though, meaning this may not be the end to the dispute. Yoon, Arirang News.
Korea's auto exports have hit a new high unseen for the month of August amid steady global demand for eco-friendly cars. Our Park Go-nu reports.
The value of auto exports last month reached an all-time high for any month of August. According to a report by the Industry Ministry on Tuesday, South Korea's automobile exports in August came to a total of $5.3 billion, a 29% jump year-on-year. South Korea has been seeing increases in the double digits every month since July 2022. Thanks to healthy outbound shipments, South Korea produced more than 300,000 vehicles in August for the first time in a decade, despite the fact that auto companies usually shut down factories during the month for about a week. An industry ministry official explained that the vehicle production supply chain only began returning to normal after the negative effect of COVID-19. Strong exports were mainly due to high demand for eco-friendly cars, including electric and hybrid vehicles, which made up almost one-third of the total auto exports. Eco-friendly cars saw a 47.8% on-year increase in terms of export value by reaching the $1.8 billion mark. Sales of environmentally friendly vehicles to the U.S. since the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act increased 153% on-year. Also, the number of electric vehicles exported rose by over 61% compared to a year before. Domestic sales of eco-friendly vehicles also soared 11.9% on-year, with hybrid cars seeing a 53% increase. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
Also in local news, Korea is looking at a record plunge in tax revenue this year, which is also the case for other countries such as the US and Japan, amid lower corporate earnings and a lackluster property market. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea's annual shortfall in national tax revenue is estimated to reach a record high this year. The Ministry of Finance and Economy announced on Monday that it has revised down its tax revenue projection for this year by $44.5 billion to around $257 billion from its original estimate. That's a nearly 15% shortfall in tax revenue and is the largest percentage miss ever. This comes as the nation's tax revenue dropped by nearly $33 billion compared to a year earlier to around $164 billion during the first 7 months this year. The ministry mainly attributed the expected shortfall to a sharp decline in corporate earnings from the sluggish chip market, a slump in the real estate market, and the downturn in the global economy. A finance ministry official said that South Korea is not the only nation that is revising downward its tax revenue estimate for this year.
This year, major countries such as the US and Japan have also seen their tax revenues drop by a larger amount than was originally expected due to the slowdown in the global economy from high prices and interest rates.
The government plans to bridge the gap mainly through surplus funds such as the Foreign Exchange Equalization Fund and excess earnings from the previous year instead of drawing up a supplementary budget. The government says that the Foreign Exchange Equalization Fund has accumulated a large amount of Korean won from efforts to stabilize the volatile $1 exchange rate last year. The government will also expand participation from domestic experts and consult experts from international organizations such as the IMF and the OECD to enhance the accuracy of tax estimates. 이수진, Arirang News.
And global oil prices are chugging higher amid persistent concerns over steady supplies. In New York, West Texas Intermediate futures hit $91 and 48 cents a barrel on Monday, the highest for this year. Over in London, Brent crude oil futures also hit a fresh high for the year, closing at $94 and 43 cents per barrel. The latest surge in global oil prices comes amid expectations of greater demand from China, the world's second largest economy, following its latest favorable economic findings. Data shows China's industrial output and retail sales expanded beyond expectations in August, hinting at potential economic stability. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. And here in Korea, in line with the wisdom of these words, efforts are underway to promote apple varieties that require less labor. Our Chung Won-ju reports.
Apple growers are working to perfect apple coloration. They regularly tend to leaves and branches, rotate the fruits, and lay reflective film on the ground to ensure even sunlight exposure. For apples to turn red, the anthocyanin pigments in the fruit skin need to be activated by sunlight exposure. Recent prolonged high temperatures during the summer, however, have led to delayed coloration and less vivid colors, resulting in an increase of 3.3 hours in the time required for coloration management compared to a decade ago. In response, the Rural Development Administration has introduced apple varieties that require less coloration effort, the Green Summer King and Yellow Golden Ball apples. The Summer King variety is available in mid-July and features a slightly green shade with a hint of red when it's ready to harvest. The Golden Ball variety ripens in mid-August and has a yellow hue and excellent flavor.
Unlike other apples that require turning and using reflected films for coloration, this yellow apple just needs a bit of leaf removal.
The Summer King variety is harvested around the same time as the Japanese variety Sugaru, but is juicier and has a refreshing crunch. The Golden Ball variety, known for its rich and intense flavor, overcomes storage issues common in summer apples as its flesh is firm.
In the past, we had to wait until fall for good apples. I'm really looking forward to enjoying delicious apples this summer.
The RDA expects these two varieties to become representative early ripening apples.
Coloration defects arise due to global warming. To address this problem, we plan to focus on distributing yellow varieties, like Golden Ball, and green varieties that don't require coloration management in areas with high temperatures.
The RDA plans to further develop new apple varieties that can maintain high quality even during the hot summer and ensure consistent yields. Chung Won-ju, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. At the United Nations General Assembly in New York, the global organization has adopted a political declaration that accelerates action to realize its sustainable development goals. Announced at a high-level forum on Monday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for the ending of hunger, switching to renewable energy, and spreading digitization and education. The SDGs include 17 goals meant to protect the planet and ensure peace and prosperity for all people. But despite the SDGs being adopted in 2015, progress has fallen short of expectations.
Yet today, only 15% of the targets are on track, and many are going in reverse. Instead of leaving no one behind, we risk leaving the SDGs behind. So, Excellencies, the SDGs need a global rescue plan.
It's hoped that Monday's declaration will speed up progress in each of the goals. In Peru, at least 24 people, including children, have been killed in a bus crash. Over 8 dozen others were injured. The bus was traveling from Ayacucho to Huancayo on Monday morning when it veered off a highway in the Huacoto region and plunged down a 200-meter deep ravine. Authorities say the bus had recently passed a safety inspection, and an investigation into the cause of the crash is underway. According to a mayor of a nearby town, the road where the bus crashed was damaged in a landslide last month and has not been repaired. In the United States, the search for a missing F-35 jet has come to an end, following the discovery of wreckage. The $80 million aircraft was found in a field north of Charleston, South Carolina on Monday local time. The find comes a day after its pilot ejected because of a mishap during a training session. The plane was left in autopilot mode, and the military lost track of it. Search efforts for the F-35B Lightning II also included a request by the military for civilians to call with any information about the missing plane. Meanwhile, a 2-day stand down for all aviation units has been declared to facilitate a discussion about safety measures and procedures. It will take place this week and apply to all units both inside and outside the US. And finally, in the United Kingdom, a new record has been set for the world's highest cheese pull. A 4-foot-wide nacho was dipped into a bowl of melted mozzarella cheese before being stretched 49 feet by a helicopter. The stunt took place over the weekend at Cheddar Gorge in Somerset and was verified by the World Talent Organization. The cheese pull was organized by Doritos Dippers to mark National Guacamole Day. It took more than a month of planning. The stunt comes as cheese pull clips have become a viral trend on short video sharing platforms, with some videos getting over 1 million views. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We are already heading into the end of September with the Chuseok holiday starting next week, but we still need to turn the AC on in the afternoon. Well, Daegu soared to nearly 33 degrees Celsius yesterday, and it will be slightly lower today, but hovering way above seasonal norms across much of Korea again. In fact, many parts of the world are dealing with a September heat wave this year with record-breaking temperatures. Well, back in Korea, upper regions could see light rain passing by, but it won't be enough to need an umbrella, whereas down south is under dazzling sunshine with very high UV rays today. Afternoon highs are 2 to 3 degrees higher than seasonal norms, and Gwangju and Busan will be topping out at 29 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Nationwide rain is in the forecast for tomorrow. Rain will start from central regions tomorrow at dawn before gradually spreading to the rest of the country. Southern provinces and east of Gangwon-do will see rain into Thursday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, those are the top stories at this hour here in Korea. Up next, we have our panel session on this year's UN General Assembly and more. Do stay with us.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world. Like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city. Transforming our world, navigating toward a better future. World Expo 2030, Busan, Korea.
Join Ashley for a treat for the eyes and ears. It's time to watch the radio. You're watching Radio Cop. You're watching Arirang.
What matters?
contour the world? Simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. Are you excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
The high-level general debate within the framework of the United Nations General Assembly begins on this Tuesday in New York, during which global leaders are expected to touch upon a broad spectrum of national, regional and universal concerns. So what are the implications of Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky's in-person attendance? Do the world's present security challenges look to unite or divide the UN General Assembly? And simply speaking, how relevant is the annual UN gathering this year? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we explore yet again the challenges that look to dominate the UN platform this year. For more on this, I have Andres Sanchez-Brown here in the studio with me. Andres, it's good to have you here.
Thanks. Always a pleasure to be here.
I also have Stephen Borwick with us. Stephen, it's been a while and great to have you back.
Thank you.
Right, Andres, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is planning an in-person appearance at the UN General Assembly this year to rally greater support from the Global South for his country's cause against Russia's invasion. Now, before we address prospects of his plans, what can you tell us about the tendency of the Global South with regard to foreign policy?
Yes, this is going to be a bit of an exceptional episode because, as you know, Volodymyr Zelensky has barely left Ukraine since the invasion started. I think he visited the U.S. last year very briefly, and he attended a G7 meeting this year in Japan. So, yes, he's going to New York, in this case, to the General Assembly, in order to, try to curry favor from the leaders of these countries, the so-called Global South, a heterogeneous group of countries from Africa, Latin America, Asia. He's going to try and do this through a speech at the General Assembly. He's going to try, maybe there will be, actually, we still don't know, a Security Council meeting called to deal with the war in Russia, but we still don't know about that. But mainly through this speech and trying to meet these leaders on a one-on-one basis. But the problem here, I think, is these Global South countries, some of them big economies, members of the so-called BRICS group. We have Brazil, we have India, we have South Africa, for instance. They so far have showed that they don't want their interests compromised if it comes to, for example, angering China or any other superpower. But in this case, Russia, most of them do still have ties with Russia. They haven't implemented sanctions or not fully implemented sanctions. Some of them haven't even condemned the Russian invasion. So it's going to be a tough sell, I think. Zelensky's going to try and do this through his so-called 10-point peace plan. And I think, as I say, hard sell. Maybe one of the points will garner some interest from some of these countries, the one related to food insecurity, the one that calls for Russia to rejoin the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But apart from that, I think it's going to be a tough sell.
Right, and staying with what Andres has just mentioned, then, Stephen, what more can you tell us about President Zelensky's proposal for this 10-point peace plan, I believe?
Well, as someone who thinks a lot about how to structure pieces of writing, it's really interesting how it's put together. It starts off with things that are very uncontroversial, like nuclear safety. Russia has taken over this Ukrainian nuclear plant, and then moves on to food security. And it starts off on these things that it would not be super hard to establish consensus on. And then at number 5, it says that Russia needs to give back all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. And then I think at number 7 is simply justice, which is, talking about Russia being persecuted for war crimes and there being a kind of international tribunal looking into all of the different incidents that have taken place since February 2022. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Zelensky to present a kind of vision for how this war could end. There are various takes on how this might come about. There are some people who suggest that in order to reach a peace agreement, Ukraine should be willing to relinquish some territory, like places that Russia has already come to control. But then the critics of that say, you cannot send the message that territorial boundaries are meaningless. You can't in any way endorse this aggression by Russia because it would incentivize Russia to do more to assert its will in its area around the former Soviet Union. So I'm interested to see what happens here, but it just does seem to me that by having all 10 of these points, these are not like baby steps. You could start with something uncontroversial like food security or the grain deal that Andres referred to. But it does get to this sort of, Russia and Ukraine have what IR theorists call non-overlapping positions. They see the issue of territory just fundamentally differently. So I think Mr. Zelensky attending in person will lend a kind of urgency and a kind of authenticity to the proceedings, and it shows how seriously he takes this, that he's willing to leave his country, which he hasn't done all that much of. But I'll be interested to see just how much progress he can make on what is a very daunting issue that's dividing a lot of observers.
Right, indeed. And in the meantime then, Andres, also aggravating concerns over conflict in Ukraine, of course, is the prospects of a potential arms deal between North Korea and Russia. First of all then, Andres, what are the chances of Russia transferring sensitive technology to North Korea in exchange for ammunition to better support its offensive against Kyiv?
Well, despite of what we saw last week, Kim Jong-un touring Russia, a very long trip, meeting Mr. Putin and in this Vostochny Cosmodrome, and Putin saying that this, this will mean that there will be strengthened cooperation in the military field between the two countries. Despite all this, and also because of the fact that we don't know the details, and we probably really won't ever know what the real details are, but I'd like to think that Russia is actually going to be quite cautious when it comes to sensitive technologies. And by sensitive, I mean the ones related to weapons of mass destruction development. There's a number of reasons I think this is the case. For instance, I don't think Moscow wants its backyard to get any messier than it already is. Then Russia is also an official member of the so-called nuclear powers, and nuclear powers never try to get any other country's nuclear arsenal to get stronger. I don't think ever, nothing like that's ever happened. And then finally, even though both countries' economies are struggling, the Russian economy is still larger, and it hasn't gone through 3 years of isolation because of the pandemic. So I think Russia has more leverage in this case, and it can get away with, it can receive this ammunition, which, by the way, is probably very old stockpiles, probably not very efficient. It's what experts call stupid ammunition. It's not guided. So I think it could get away with simply exchanging it for economic aid, food aid, and in the worst case scenario, let's say modernizing conventional forces assets. By conventional forces, I mean, Navy, Air Force. This is, North Korea's assets in these fields are really old. But when it comes to these sensitive technologies, the ones that some media, reported that Russia was apparently going to transfer in exchange for ammunition. For instance, technology for nuclear-propelled submarines. If North Korea gets its hands on this, it means that sooner or later it's going to develop submarines that will be able to launch ballistic missiles and will be able to go underwater for 3 to 4 months at a time. This means they're going to be able to sail all the way very close to U.S. waters, for example. Extremely dangerous. I don't think Moscow wants that. Then again, satellite technology. If North Korea does get its hands on some sophisticated Russian technology, it can help it develop or perfect, for example, multiple warhead reentry vehicles, which is the tip of a missile that will allow you to launch a simultaneous nuclear attack on several targets at a time. Extremely dangerous again. So why, for example, did this summit happen at the Cosmodrome? Well, according to what we saw, which is, Kim inspecting, for example, the Soyuz or the UNGA rockets or the flame pit of this Cosmodrome, the spaceport, is maybe because Russia is simply interested in launching the DPRK's satellites in this Cosmodrome, because I think, they're about to finish this new spaceport and they're trying to sell it to other countries, Myanmar, Belarus. They're trying to make some money out of this operation because up until now, they were using Baikonur, the one in Kazakhstan, to launch satellites, and they couldn't make any money out of it. So I want to remain optimistic and think that this would be probably what's going to happen. But
And then,
let's see.
All right then, Andres will take a cautious, optimistic stance on this. What about you, Stephen? What are your thoughts on the possibility of an actual ammunition for advanced technology deal between North Korea and Russia?
I guess I'm taking a skeptical stance. I wonder how much of this trip was aimed at real deal making and how much of it was theater. I mean, in my email inbox every day, I receive all of the KCNA articles, and it was really kind of over the top, more than usual, just like very effusive about how Kim Jong-un was greeted in Russia and the cordiality between the two sides. I'm very skeptical that something is going to come from this where like North Korea supplies munitions to Russia that end up having a significant effect on the battlefield in Ukraine. I think the satellite angle is interesting. North Korea has conducted 2 unsuccessful attempted satellite launches this year, so perhaps there's some interesting collaboration there, and especially with the fact that satellite technology is on its face non-lethal, and so that's kind of easier to explain. I wonder how much of this is just about both countries, probably North Korea more so, but both countries symbolically showing the world that they have other options, that they have other friends, that they're not sitting at home waiting for the United States or the international community to call. They're going out and they're cultivating other partnerships, and they've got other things going on. But due to the opacity that surrounds a lot of what both of these countries do, I am again skeptical that all that much tangible will come out of this. And I think that what's more likely is that historians will look back on this trip and remember it more as a kind of symbolic gesture that got people like us talking.
Right, hopefully you're right then. In the meantime, though, President Yoon he intends to share his concerns about a potential collusion, if I may, between North Korea and Russia at the UN General Assembly. That being said, Andres, do you suppose that this particular issue concerning threats posed by North Korea here on the Korean Peninsula, does that particular issue look to unite the UN platform, or does it look to divide it?
Well, I believe there will be a united front, backing President Yoon's claims, but it will be, the usual suspects. The U.S., the EU, Japan, Australia, etc. Unfortunately, some other countries, including these so-called global South countries, might not really back these claims because, as Stephen just put it, it's like we really haven't seen anything coming out of this yet, and we might never even see anything coming out of this summit. And if it does, it's gonna take time. So yeah, that said, I'm not really sure there's gonna be a strong condemnation for this alleged collusion on military terms. But that said, I do think that countries should worry about a situation in the peninsula, meaning that if finally Russia does transfer, even if it's just conventional forces, as I said, if it just contributes to modernize the North Korean army, that is very worrying because, sometimes I think that some countries do have a certain perception gap of what the situation is like in the peninsula. They just seem to think that this is just, rhetoric and fake escalation. But the truth is that we've seen an important military escalation in this region for decades, and especially in the last 2 decades when it comes to military buildup. And if Russia is going to transfer or modernize the North Korean army, that contributes to this buildup. And unfortunately, in a scenario like that, a miscalculation is always on the cards. So I think countries should pay more attention to the situation here.
Right, indeed. Moving forward, Stephen, there are some critics who claim that this particular UN General Assembly may have no relevance, as all 4 out of the 5 permanent member leaders of the UN Security Council are poised to miss the gathering this year. What are your thoughts?
I think there might be some kind of recency bias at work when we look at things like the UN General Assembly. I think it's like not, at the very least, not unprecedented that 4 or 5 would not be there for whatever reason. Like China's usually not there, and then I'm not an expert on how things work at the UN, but I think that if you just looking at this particular one, you see that there's a Ukraine issue, there's coups going on in the Sahel region of Africa, there's a crisis in Haiti. There's the bigger questions of climate change and of inequality around the world. But anybody who can find a time of contemporary human history where there were no wars and there were no crises and everything was fine, please raise your hand. I'm not aware of that ever happening. So there is, I guess the leader is skipping it. Like, one thing that we could have inferred that from that is that it's a demonstration of division, the division over how to address these matters. But last week I was at the G20 in India, and going into that, the consensus was that there was going to be no communique, that the leaders were not going to be able to agree on anything because of this division, because there's these big countries that see these pressing issues fundamentally differently. But there was a communique, and there was an agreement, and we can parse the wording and we can critique whether or not it was a good agreement or not. But putting that aside, I just think that there is a real, I think when countries are at the UN, it's harder for countries at the UN to be sort of openly pursuing their own self-interest. That's kind of not the purpose of the UN. The purpose of the UN is that the countries get together and they pursue some kind of collective vision of how the world is supposed to work. That's more challenging than something like the G20, where each country is kind of openly there for economic and for trade-related reasons, and it's easier to kind of come up with self-interested and more modest gains. The UN speaks very much in the language of the international rules-based order and of these big and quite meaningful ideas that nobody, that we all believe in to some extent, but nobody's able to ever pursue quite perfectly. So that's, I think, something interesting to keep in mind. I just wrote a long story about the kind of splitting of the world between countries like India, who are sort of openly self-interested, and countries like the US and South Korea and Japan, who at this moment in history are doubling down on the language of that there is a rules-based order, and that countries are supposed to follow this set of, not perfectly defined, but pretty well understood rules. So this General Assembly will be one more indication as to which direction that whole debate is going in.
Right, and talking about debate, Andres, do you suppose, we've talked about issues that look to potentially divide the UN General Assembly. What issues then are there that could perhaps unite the Assembly itself?
Well, I think right now the world's problems, the problems have always been there, and but I guess the implication of these problems, the implications are getting more and more global. So what we need to we need a wider global consensus, I guess, and we saw this on G20, but there were some positive signs, I think. But yeah, unfortunately, fronts where we're going to see some unity, I'd like to think some of them might be, for example, the need to increase urgently aid for Libya, for example, after what happened in the city of Derna, this flooding through a huge tsunami that cost thousands of people dead. It's a torn country ruled by 2 different factions. And we have to avoid a spur of waterborne diseases that could claim like thousands of additional lives, right? Sustainable development goals, it's 7 years to 2030, And I believe only 15% of such goals are on track right now. So I'd like to think that some of the talks will have to do with, increasing funding, definitely. Maybe COP28, the meeting that will happen in Dubai later this year, or strengthening supply chains. But aside from that, I'm not sure we'll see much consensus on much else.
Right. On a lighter note then, Stephen, President Yoon Suk-yeol, he's poised to hold more than well over 30 bilateral summits with his counterparts from across the world at the UN General Assembly. He's seeking to, of course, rally greater support for Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. That being said, what are your thoughts on Busan's prospects of hosting the event?
Well, I don't know. Is Vegas giving odds on this? I mean, there probably are. No, I don't know exactly what the prospects are. I don't really think that's for me to say. I'm not privy to the behind the scenes. I don't know anything more about this than anybody else does. But I can just say, whatever happens, it certainly won't be for a lack of effort. I mean, the Korean government has been, I don't know how much they've invested in this, but I've been to Busan a few times this year. There's tons of advertising there, and there's nowadays, if you go to events in Korea that, on their face have nothing to do with the World Expo, there's usually a presentation or there's somebody speaking on this. It's a real kind of all hands on deck effort, and illustrated by President Yoon having roughly 30 separate summits on the sidelines of the UN gathering. There is some strong competition from Saudi Arabia, another deep-pocketed country with a history of hosting big international events. So I'm just as interested as anybody to see. I'm going to do my objective reporter thing and say that I don't have a horse in the race, but I'm interested to see how it works out.
Right, me too. Hopefully 7 years from now, we'll be sitting here talking about Busan hosting the 2030 World Expo. All right, well, on that note then, Stephen, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure.
And Andreas, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks for having us here.
Right, well, on that note, we end Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Join us same time tomorrow for a gauge of the economy. Thank you for now.
Hello everyone, my name is Songkan Luangmuniton. I am the ambassador of the Lao PDR to the Republic of Korea. To me, Korea is